My son's wedding planner called. Your family canceled your invitation, but keep the $200.00 K deposit, then I said. It was a Tuesday morning when the call came through, while I was reviewing quarterly figures in my office suite at Sterling Hospitality Group. My assistant buzzed gently with the message, "Elegant Events Wedding Planning is on the line." I pressed accept, curious because we rarely send brides to Elegant Events. They were competitors, yet they co-hosted one of our premium venues. A woman's voice, rehearsed and polished, came across the line. "Good morning, ma'am. I hope I'm not interrupting anything too important," she said, as if concerned. "I was instructed to give you a call today regarding the Henderson Miller wedding." I did not respond. Then she continued in the same tone, coolly professional. "And before we continue, I was also asked, very specifically, to remind you that the couple is aiming for a refined and respectable atmosphere, and they'd appreciate it if we could avoid any elements that might detract from that." I waited. The implication hung unspoken in the air. There are some people who do not fit the vision, and I was clearly not part of it. A quiet stabbing sensation, as though someone applied a cold blade to a warm heart. After that, she delivered the blow with an apology. "Ma'am, I am truly sorry to say this, but your son specifically asked me to tell you this, so there would be no confusion. He said, and I quote, 'Tell her this day is about elegance and dignity, not about guilt and garbage from the past.' Elegance, dignity, guilt, garbage." She had made the contrast clear. I must be all the wrong things. I did not speak. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking in the implications. My son, Marcus, the child I raised from infancy when another child was lost at birth, had declared me a stain on his moment of triumph. In his world, understatement of this level was a declaration. You are unbought, unwelcome, unworthy. I pressed end call, quietly, then leaned back in my chair, watching the skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I had helped build some of those towers with my investments. I had poured my life savings into this city, its hotels, its banquet halls, its transportation fleets, all under the umbrella of Sterling Hospitality Group, the company I founded after my husband's illness forced me to step into the workforce. I had built that company piece by piece to fund my son's better future, only to be pushed aside the moment my money conceitedly had done its work. I stared at the reflection of my own face in the window pane. A woman well past 60, no hair tinted, no cartilage tucked, no whisper of luxury. Yet in the reflection, I recognized the quiet bones of someone who had refused to vanish. I had never expected acknowledgement. I had only counted on presence. That morning, presence wasn't enough. The planner's voice had presented as corporate decorum. Underneath lay the contempt of guilt turned public shame. "Garbage," they called me. Echoes of that word sank into my chest. I thought of the $200,000 0 cents I had withdrawn from my medical savings and retirement account. The same amount I sold my husband's last heirlooms to raise, because Marcus insisted he could not be shamed by others for lack of funds. He cried on the phone. If this wedding fell apart, he would lose her, would lose everything. I wrote him a check without condition, without fanfare. I never told the board. I never made a speech. I let the check surface silently from my private account into the vendor's account, even as I watched the signature lines bearing no trace of my name. I funded elegance. I paid in full. I was only as present as the eyes that saw me. Now I stood after he had thrown me out. I pressed a button on the desk. My assistant entered. She asked if I needed anything. I replied calmly, "Resume the board meeting." She gave a small nod and closed the door. I turned back to my screen, where projections awaited. Revenue had been climbing steadily. Sterling Hospitality Group was cash positive. I dipped a pen in ink and tapped it gently on my desk, then let it sit. Nothing else moved inside me. I let the silence gather. I let the city hum through my windows. Once again, unaware that I was not asking for applause. I held my silence. No debate, no demand for explanation. My presence was a protest. All I did was acknowledge that Marcus had built a throne of lies, and in the process had declared his mother a liability, not an asset. You do that often to what you cannot own. On the wall behind me hung a framed photograph of the first banquet hall I purchased 20 years ago. I had purchased it when Marcus was 11, refusing to let him feel poor among his classmates. We transformed it into a flagship venue. Now, it had Henderson Miller reception on a marquee front page. Without me, I pictured it in my mind. Empty chairs. Floral arrangements I had approved earlier that morning for delivery. Waitstaff wearing uniforms we had supplied. Every single vendor set to serve a wedding that owed a year's worth of planning to me, and yet the guest of honor would not be welcome. That is when I decided I would no longer pay for invisibility. Not from my own hands, not from my own funds. I drafted an email to Caitlin. Simple, precise, unapologetic. Send them the invoice for cancellation, process refunds for all guests. I am keeping the $200,000, 0 cents. Then I hit send. That email was not just an order, it was a breaking point. I paused, wondering if Marie Curie felt the same stillness when she shattered expectations. 3 minutes later, the board meeting resumed. Contractors who understood my commands quietly began canceling orders. Templates went out, refunds queued. A wedding worth $500,000 evaporated from the calendar that day, and the only person who knew everything but refused to host it was me. I stood up and straightened my jacket. No one clapped, no one cheered, because power is often silent, because I never needed validation. What I needed was acknowledgement, and when it does not come, a quiet closure, like closing a door, can be more effective than the warmest embrace. I watched the city's indifference through the window again. Those buildings, that life, had brought us here. Now they would bear witness. I rose to speak at the board about new acquisitions, new direction, but not one word about Marcus. That chapter had closed, and yet, in that very silence, I felt the first stirrings of something that was no longer about control. It was about reclaiming my own narrative, not as a shadow supporting my son's spotlight, but as a woman who built the stage and refused to fade. A few hours after I had canceled the wedding, the office phone rang again. I answered, expecting perhaps a vendor or a board member, but the familiar tone of Marcus's voice came through, sharp, cold, unapologetic. I had given him everything, a childhood that would not go hungry, an education he would not owe, and a future he believed was only his. Now that he had taken all of it, he felt entitled to throw me away. He began with no preamble. "You just cannot help yourself, can you?" I let the words hang, like a bridge collapsing under weight. I waited while the line clicked softly against the static of distance. He continued, slow and purposeful. Each phrase another blow. "This is exactly why I didn't want you there, Mom. You suck the joy out of every room you enter." His voice had become a weapon that day. He struck again. "Trash doesn't belong at the table just because it once bought the meal." I did not interrupt. I hung up without a word, allowing the click of disconnection to amplify the finality of his sentiment. It was 8 years earlier that I had drafted the agreement. 20% of Sterling Hospitality Group, the company I had built from nothing, was to be his wedding gift. $30-odd million worth of shares, signed and notarized. I had never told anyone. Not the board, not my banker, not even my other children. I believed we all carried debts and dreams in silence, and that a mother's greatest gift is doing what must be done without trumpets. I let the signed contract lie untouched in the drawer, unused but ready, a promise given before love was questioned. That promise died the moment he called me trash. The paper curled in my hand. As I folded the fragments, a single flutter of ink-stained dust drifted onto the carpet, symbolic of promises scattered by betrayal. Without a ceremony, I retrieved the printed document and ripped it in two, piece by piece, folding the ripped edges until the ink cracked, until the paper curled. No celebration, no announcement. The goodbye was in the shredding. At that moment, a second knock came at the door, softer than authority and gentler than grief. It was her, my daughter, born the same night Marcus was told his real mother had died, and he was placed in my arms by mistake. 5 years ago she found me. It was not messy or dramatic. She carried a brass hospital ID bracelet, the one from her birth file, wrapped in tissue, clutched like evidence of 2 lifetimes. She was 21, curious, with a framed picture of a hospital ID bracelet and a name that did not feel like hers. She came alone to my office, and I did not run. I had already forgiven her absence. She said simply, "I came because I know you are my mother." She reached out and touched the desk, no words more necessary. Today she entered the room wearing jeans, carrying a small bouquet of daisies, 2 for every year since she first saw me in a photograph, then knew. She was here for Marcus. She had asked politely for the invitation, no intention of upheaval, only hope for family reconciliation. She said softly, "I just wanted to wish him well." She sat quietly in the empty office chair behind me. She did not ask to watch the news. She did not request details. She sat still as a prayer, silent witness beside me. I did not turn. I let her presence speak. Soon enough, another voice rang through the speaker again. Marcus calling back, as if the line had never closed. In vulture song, he repeated the take, "Mom, you think money compensates for God's silence, but you were never a mother to me." He said that I was unwelcome. He said that I had already signed away my place in his life long ago. I did not respond. In his voice I heard the echo of every sacrifice I had made. I clenched my hand into a fist, knuckles white against the polished mahogany. My daughter whispered then, though spoken through love and horror both, "He cannot speak for you, Mom. Let me be your voice." I did not argue. Later I learned that she stepped into view of a hidden security camera to join the call from my line. Her tone remained steady. "He has no right to speak for me." She clicked the button to hang up. That single act, 2 daughters in defiance of one man's cruelty, did more than tears or threats could. Then she said quietly, "Can he really say that about you?" I stood and turned to face her. I offered her the contract fragments in my hand, the burnt edges of heaped paper. 20%, I said, signed 6 years ago, but promises are only good as the people who keep them. I expected silence. Instead, she looked at me with a kind of pride I had never known. She took the pieces carefully and tucked them into her pocket. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. She gathered up her bouquet, discarded in shock at what she had witnessed. She offered them to me. "Open them if you wish," she said. And for once, instead of feeling the ache of a lost child, I held the blossoms with a hand that no longer trembled. Our office was quiet, except for the hum of enterprise outside. Our space, once brimming with contracts and signatures, felt empty in the absence of celebration, but full in the presence of understanding. I walked to the window and she came to stand beside me. She did not cry. She simply rested her shoulder against mine. I felt the pulse of the city beneath our feet, the same skyline I had looked at when the planner called. I felt in that moment the weight of being uninvited, the price of being seen, and the cost of finally stepping out of invisibility. My heart did not break again. It expanded. Konrazmi Sonunoy had hurled every insult he thought could wound me. He was wrong. His invitations would never again matter. The table he had built without me now had no seat for him. As for me and my daughter, we would walk forward quietly, but not ashamed. My debts were repaid, my dignity reclaimed. From the desk drawer I retrieved an envelope, labeled, "For her only," in my handwriting. It read, For the 100th drawer I retrieved an envelope, labeled, "For her only," in my hand. I handed it to her without comment. She read the name inside the note. It was her name, written by me. The note said simply, "I love you and I choose you." She touched her lips. She looked up at me. No more words were needed. We sat in silence until the assistant knocked again, unaware of the rupture and reconstruction happening inside. I told her to take the rest of the day off. "I will handle things from here," I said. My daughter and I walked out together, our steps aligned, 2 women who would never again allow the word garbage to echo while their foundations remain unshakable. I closed the door to my office and called Caitlin back on her direct line. My voice was calm and deliberate as I said, "Cancel the wedding. Venue, flowers, hotel, catering, transportation, everything." I did not need to raise my tone. I did not need to say more. There was a silence on the other end, and then she responded in a tremor. "But ma'am, you are not the bride or groom." I waited. I let the words dangle. Finally I replied evenly, "And who owns Elegant Events?" That question hung in the air. Caitlin stammered at first. She cleared her throat. I asked again, "Owned by Sterling Event Holdings, correct?" I did not let her answer before I continued, "And who owns Sterling Event Holdings?" There was a long pause, as though she were flipping through a mental directory. Then she said uncertainly, "Sterling Hospitality Group." I responded, "Yes, and I am David's mother. I am also the sole owner and CEO of that group." Another pause. I let the silence expand. She finally whispered, "I had no idea." I did not say thank you. I did not judge the tremor in her behavior. I said only, "Send cancellation notices to all vendors. Issue refunds for accommodation and services. Forward the invoice to the Henderson Miller family minus the $200,000, 0 cents deposit. They will keep it as the cancellation fee." I ended the call without another word. No name-calling, no promises of retribution. It was complete, professional. I closed my eyes and took a breath before returning to the board meeting I had interrupted earlier without explanation. Silently, the commands echoed through the organization. My executive assistant coordinated with elegant events. My finance team prepared refund batches. My legal counsel issued notices to the hotel, the florist, the transportation company, all entities under the Sterling Hospitality umbrella. Vendors were told protocols had changed. Effectively, the contract had been nullified by the sole payor of record. I watched models of those operations flow away like dominoes. Rehearsal dinner canceled, limousine reservation dropped, catering halls freed, floral designers called to halt installations. The entire wedding infrastructure collapsed with the weight of one sentence. It was no longer proceeding. I remained seated, hands folded. I did not cry. I did not gloat. I measured my silence. I understood power did not need applause. I observed the reflection of my own face in the window pane. A woman who had built everything in silence. My agency was not a shout against them. It was a decision they could not ignore. Later that afternoon, the CFO came into my office. He said quietly, "Yes, ma'am, our systems reflect cancellation. Refunds have begun processing. All client deposits have been channeled back to guest accounts. The $200,000, 0 cents deposit remains intact in your trust fund." I nodded once. I accepted the news. I did not correct him or explain beyond what had been ordered. I already knew. I called my assistant back into the room. She entered and confirmed that the planners, vendors, hotel liaison, and security notices had been delivered. I told her simply, "Thank them for their discretion and return to their tasks." She nodded and left. I recalled the day I signed those papers granting Marcus 20% ownership in Sterling Hospitality Group as a wedding gift. That document had been drawn up with pride and filed in a vault. Not a word was spoken publicly. Now I felt no regret for tearing it into pieces. That contract had borne his entitlement, and I no longer saw reason to preserve it. He would not have understood its symbolism, he would only have used it. The oak desk beneath my hands had witnessed my confidence, my generosity, my broken hope. I stood and looked around the room at the tokens of my life's work. A framed model of the first grand hall I'd purchased, a plaque commemorating 10 years of expansion, photographs of gala openings, my own portrait in the lobby foyer. Those things did not need defending with words. Their presence proved value. I only needed to show that I would no longer underwrite absence. No one knocked to tepid applause. No staff begged for commentary. The power of that call lay in its finality and precision. A chair once designated for me at the rehearsal dinner now sat empty. I imagined guests turning to look. Their eyes would feel the loss of elegance without dignity. That room would not recover. By evening, planners would have called other venues to try and rebook. They would find no space. The logistics were unwound. The delay was too late to recover. The Henderson Millers would face harsh decisions or a week of stress unprepared. Theirs was not a crisis I needed to witness. Theirs was a world I chose to recede from. I returned to the spreadsheet again. Forecasts looked promising. Growth in new territories, rebranding of hotels, acquisitions of small chains in 3 states. My legacy was neither a single wedding nor a single son. I helped to build a hospitality network, quiet, resilient, and informed by what must be paid when you choose silence over spectacle. Silence is not absence. It is presence in control of how and when it speaks. That night, I left the office under the glow of streetlights. I went to my small apartment in Queens. My house keys made a gentle chime. My cactus still stood by the window, decades old and resilient. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the plant. The city beyond hummed, unaware of whose empire had whispered its silent command. I opened a letter from today, an envelope addressed to me. Inside was the cancellation invoice, neatly itemized, and a note from Caitlin. Your instructions were clear, ma'am. I have sent everything. I apologize this had to end this way. I placed it beside my husband's framed wedding photo. I did not feel regret. I felt resolution. In the morning, I would write a memo to my daughter, my real daughter, and tell her not to worry about inheritance trusts or contracts. She would come later that day with a bouquet of daisies and ask for nothing more than to stand beside me. I would hand her the fragments of the contract with her brother's name on it and ask her to place it in my desk drawer. She would forgive me, not for breaking a promise, but for finally seeing what kind of promise could not be honored. I drank the last drop of my tea and stood. Shadows lengthened across the vintage rug as the city lights began to twinkle. Behind me, my door closed softly, and with it, a chapter of service ended. What remained was authority, reclaimed, dignity restored, and the quiet knowledge that my power was not loud but unshakable. The exposure required no spectacle, it unfolded through absence. Screens showed empty rows and unpaid hall fees. One caterer posted, 2 days' notice, no meal. Sterling's CEO pulled the plug. Videos from the event hall posted almost immediately showed empty chairs, a silent stage draped in unused linens, floral arrangements left untouched, and guests murmuring in confusion. Drivers who had already been contracted to ferry bridesmaids stood outside the lobby in tuxedos, unsure whether to wait or leave. Riverside banqueting staff posted anonymously in a planning group. Something big went down. The bride's vendor chain just canceled on them. Meal orders, entertainment, everything. My company's name was never mentioned. I did not need to open my mouth. The truth circulated beyond press releases. Invoices were leaked. One florist confirmed, "You know the reason?" Sterling CEO pulled the plug. Entire contract gone. A catering manager from the rehearsal dinner venue posted, "We got the 48-hour cancellation notice from inside Sterling. They said they owned all vendors and wouldn't risk tarnishing their brand." The local newspaper ran a dry headline, "Elegant events called off suddenly, company owner alleged." One painlessly accurate line in the article read, "Sources say the architect of the cancellation was the mother of the groom, also CEO of the Hospitality Corporation, underwriting this and 5 other similar weddings annually." Nobody quoted me, nobody tagged me. The exposure was mechanical, not theatrical. The next morning I opened trade newsletters, pages discussing liability issues and corporate transparency in wedding contracts. A law professor had posted an opinion piece, "When the payor is also the provider, litigation becomes moot. Sterling's case sets precedent in risk management." Social media sites, run by event professionals, debated under pose titles like, "Who has the real power in a wedding plan?" Comments praised the unnamed mother's restraint and expressed relief that justice did not require tears or outrage. "It was a corporate decision, not an emotional one," said one post, and liked by hundreds. There were no franchises, no hashtags, no viral kitchen table drama. Commerce discovered justice by transactions and terms. The guests, who had been refunded, posted notes in shared boards. "You cannot serve food if you don't exist." That day never happened. Meanwhile, the board of Sterling Hospitality Forum, internal newsletter, listed the full vendor list that was withdrawn, along with reimbursements issued. That email went to every manager in the company. Nobody forwarded it to the local press. They understood that authenticity does not always wear spotlight, it often wears integrity. The cancellation was now case study in one boardroom after another, how to respond when an insider behaves like a client, and what happens when the same corporation owns the stage and the seats. Within hours, multiple vendors in the bridal supply chain, photography studios, transportation firms, floral services, sent letters through internal HR acknowledging they had been paid in full for termination fees, citing executive instructions. One letter said, "It is with reluctance we cancel your services, but instructions were corporate way signed off by the CEO." The price tag was clear. No bitter statements. No lawsuits, just accounting. Every penny documented, every refund checked off. Refunds for 220 hotel reservations, 80 chairs, 8 floral installations, catering orders, rehearsal dinner, bar setup. Canceled, logged, reconciled. That evening, the local gossip newsletter published a short entry. "Wedding called off in Sterling, operated venue. Mother of the groom implicated as decision maker." But then it disappeared. No follow-ups, no clickbait. Reporters moved on to new stories. Yet at community events near our properties, small weddings, corporate dinners, vendors commented quietly. She did it. She walked away when she could. I sat in my small Queens apartment that night, opening the mail. A thank you note from a couple let down but refunded, acknowledging prompt return of deposit with a kind apology for inconvenience. A tray of letters arrived, some from strangers saying they saw screenshots of the haul and felt justice had happened. None looked for me to sign anything or speak into a camera. Justice had no need for charm when it had authority on its side. Later I lay in bed, listening to the city traffic, feeling at once empty and complete. The cancellation unfolded as I knew it would, quietly, systematically, and with purpose, without a trace of spectacle. My power was not performance. My voice had been heard by the only people who mattered. I closed my eyes. The next chapter, if any, would be outside of savings and contracts. I felt no triumph, only the unyielded peace of someone finally removed from the category of guilt or garbage without begging pardon. The company continued. Subscribers counted outcomes in 5-figure refunds, vendors reset schedules, guests planned alternate dinners. But none tried to reclaim that wedding date, and that was the whole point. I drifted towards sleep, chest weightless, thinking only, a wedding unbuilt by the people who built it is the analog of a lie exposed in a boardroom. And the truth does not need applause. It needs certainty. I heard from Marcus only hours after the exposure rippled through vendors and guests alike. My phone lit up with a message from him. "You've humiliated us. You killed my wedding." I did not press reply. Instead, I opened my desk drawer, retrieved a small photo of my wedding day. My husband and I, 3 decades ago, standing beneath a willow tree on a quiet afternoon, and slid the message into a plastic sleeve, sealing it carefully so the words could never fade, then placed it beside that old wedding photo inside the box I keep beneath my desk. That wedding ring, too, was in that box, the one I had sold years ago to raise funds for this event. I did not cry then. I did not feel vindication. I simply nodded to myself, acknowledging that language can wound more deeply than absence. Later that day, I received an email marked urgent, personal, from my daughter Elena, my birth daughter who I had found after 20 years. She asked for a meeting. We met 3 hours later in a private dining room at Harborview Resort, the flagship venue I acquired 7 years ago. The room overlooked the harbor and had all the warmth of polished oak and neutral tones, but it was empty of celebration now. I entered, closed the door behind me, and saw them. Marcus, seated stiffly, white-knuckled, my ex-husband, and the woman who had become Marcus's wife, standing, tears already shining in her eyes. My daughter sat beside me, calm and resolute, hands folded like a prayer. Marcus's wife leaned forward and spoke first. "We are sorry. All of us. I believed him about you, and I never asked. I should have spoken up." My ex-husband's voice shook. "I apologize for every time I let pride blind me. I did not see you, only what our son wanted to believe." Marcus finally spoke, haltingly. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting a vision of success, but I protected nothing. I hurt you." He paused. "Why didn't you ever tell us who you were?" I looked at Marcus without malice. I had to decide what honesty felt like in that moment. I replied, "Because if you loved me, you would have invited me without knowing. You did not need confirmation, you needed love and presence." Silence followed. My daughter slipped her hand through mine and squeezed gently. Marcus wiped his face with a handkerchief. "You had 20% of that company signed in your name. I know it now. I never even asked. I watched you fade while I chased shadows." My ex-husband leaned forward. "We should have seen past tradition to the values you taught us." His wife nodded, eyes red. "I saw the contracts on your desk once," she said. "I thought it was someone else. I regret it every day." There was no performance. I did not accept their apologies with fireworks or speeches. I acknowledged them, and I held their gaze. I rose and said quietly, "There is nothing more to forgive. You looked away when shadows were brighter than substance. You chose flash over foundation." I stepped away and placed the framed message in the center of the table. They all stared at the plastic sleeve with the words, "You killed my wedding." Their regret felt heavy enough to rest there. Then I turned to my daughter. "Elena, you may grow this company however you wish. Your brother's seat is vacant. It is for you now." She swallowed and nodded. I said again, "To the boardroom. We'll walk the rest of the way together, but truth is non-negotiable." I left before they could respond. I returned to my apartment that evening. I unpacked the plastic sleeve and tucked it into the same box as the photograph and the ring. Those words belonged there too. I drank tea on the terrace beside my cactus. No fanfare, no declaration, just silence, filled with finality. In the morning we would speak about business restructuring, but that night I did not care about stock value or annual reports. I cared only that they had looked at me. For once, I was the subject of their reflection. I closed the lid of the box and held it close. The echoes of apology lingered, not as absolution but as the faintest seed of change, planted in acknowledgement rather than denial. Elena sat beside me at the long oak table, sunlight washing across her face through the high windows of my office. She had not asked for anything, not gratitude, not recognition, but she came when others turned their backs. She stood beside me when my name was wiped from the guest list. Not to defend, but because the truth sat naturally on her shoulders. I slid a folder across the table. She blinked at the Sterling Group seal on the cover, then looked up at me. "What's this?" she asked softly. Her voice was steady, like mine was 30 years ago when I first founded the company. I nodded toward the papers inside. "It is a transfer of 20% ownership," I said. "Voting shares, decision rights, a seat at the table." She opened the folder slowly. Her hands trembled, not from greed or surprise, but from something deeper. I leaned back and folded my hands. "This is not because you defended me," I said. "It is because you never asked me to prove who I was. You never required credentials before offering your hand." She swallowed and closed the folder carefully, almost reverently. "Thank you," she whispered. I reached across the table and touched her hand. "You are my daughter not just by blood. You are mine because you saw me when the world saw nothing." She did not cry, neither did I, but the room held something that no board meeting or financial review ever had: permanence. Weeks passed, plans took shape. Elena's wedding was quiet, elegant, without the spectacle her adoptive brother once demanded. She chose Grand Harbor, the very venue Marcus once believed was built for his triumph. Now it stood not as a symbol of wealth but of restoration. She invited me to walk her down the aisle. I declined, gently. "This is your day," I told her, "not a stage for reparation." Instead, I arrived early. I wore navy, not black, and pinned a small white lily to my chest. I sat 3 rows back, not in the front row reserved for family, but where the view was soft and honest. I folded my hands in my lap and watched. The ceremony was held in the West Garden. Morning light bathed the scene in gold. Elena walked down the aisle with her head high, her steps sure. The man at her side was kind-eyed and quiet, just as I had hoped. No one announced who paid for the flowers or the music. No one whispered about ownership or history. It was a wedding of presence, not pretense. During the vows, Elena turned toward the guests. "There is someone here who taught me that love is not about being loud. It is about being constant," she said. Her voice did not waver. "She is not in the front row, but she has always stood beside me." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen in full. After the ceremony, guests mingled beneath linen canopies. I stayed to the side. No cameras followed me, no speeches praised me. Elena passed through the crowd, laughing, radiant, pausing beside me only briefly. She took my hand in both of hers. "I am so glad you came," she said. "I never considered not," I replied. She nodded. Neither did I. As the evening faded into music and toasts, I left quietly. No one noticed, and I preferred it that way. I walked alone through the lobby of the hotel I owned, past the chandelier I selected 15 years ago, down the corridor whose wallpaper I had approved after a long debate about texture and light. I reached the elevator and pressed the button with a calm that came only from having nothing left to prove. In my room, I took off my heels and sat by the window. The city lights blinked in the distance, a rhythm I had long understood. I thought of Marcus, what might have been, what had been said, what had been lost. And then I thought of Elena, of the daughter returned, of the name no longer whispered but spoken with pride. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to be sent, not to be framed, just to be kept. Dear Elena, you reminded me that truth does not require a stage, that dignity lives in the quietest gestures. You never asked me to prove I mattered. You just made space for me to matter. This company will one day be yours, not because you are my blood, but because you carry the values that built every brick of it. That is legacy, not capital, but character. I placed the letter in the box, beside the photo, the wedding ring, the sealed message from Marcus, and the transfer papers signed that morning. The box was heavier now, but not in grief. In clarity. I turned off the light and slept peacefully. Marcus never called again. No apology, no second chance, no remorse wrapped in panic. After the wedding collapsed and his name began to circulate in boardrooms and industry lists as the son who had spat on the hands that fed him, he simply disappeared. I suppose that is one way to survive the shame, by vanishing into silence, by letting pride become a prison. He no longer existed in my family records, only as a legal annotation in an old adoption file. Status. Closed. To the world he became a footnote. To me he became a stranger I once raised, but I did not grieve him. You cannot grieve what someone chose to bury. And Marcus had buried me. Long before that wedding, he just did not realize I was the root, not the weed. Elena stood at the head of the boardroom table the following month. She did not inherit the seat. I handed it to her. She read every file, asked every question, walked the hallways of our properties like someone determined not to impress, but to understand. She had not been groomed for the role, but she was born for it. And when the time came, I stepped back, not down, just back, not into obscurity, but into intention. That fall, I withdrew $5 million, not from Sterling Group's account, but from my own, quietly, deliberately. I used the funds to establish something I had dreamed of for decades but never dared to name, the Silent Seat Foundation. It is a scholarship fund for mothers who were erased, by arrogance, by betrayal, by families that used them and discarded them when convenience ran out. It provides education, housing, and legal assistance to women whose love was deemed invisible until their absence was felt too late. At the launch ceremony, Elena stood beside me in a simple navy suit. She did not wear the title President on her chest. She let her actions carry the weight. The press was sparse. That was intentional. No confetti, no influencer campaigns, just a podium, a seal, and a room full of women who had been told they were too much, too old, or too irrelevant. She opened her speech by holding my hand. She never built on applause. She built on integrity. The room fell silent as she paused, and even the press leaned forward. Elena adjusted the microphone, looked out at the modest audience, and began. My mother never raised her voice, but the world finally heard her. A silence followed that sentence, one of reverence, not emptiness. She continued, there are mothers who sat in hospital rooms alone, who paid for graduations but were cropped out of the photos, who fed legacies but were labeled liabilities. This foundation exists because their love deserves more than memory. It deserves structure. It deserves seatbelts, business plans, and a future. She gestured toward me. This woman built an empire not out of ambition but out of absence. Every room she was excluded from, she built a better one. And now, those rooms are open to others. I did not cry, but my fingers gripped the chair just slightly tighter. Not out of pain, but because the weight of being witnessed is heavy when you have carried yourself alone for so long. That night, after the guests had left and the lights dimmed, Alina and I walked through the corridors of the first hotel I had ever bought. I told her how I slept in the back office during renovations, how I handled leaks during conferences, how I stood in the banquet room one night after a broken engagement and whispered, "This will matter one day." She linked her arm through mine. "It matters now," she said. Outside, the streetlights blinked like quiet applause. No reporters waited. No family came chasing forgiveness. Just a mother and daughter walking the empire they built, not from bitterness but from truth. And somewhere, I imagine, Marcus still tells himself a version of the story where he was wronged. That is his right. But this legacy is mine. And now, it belongs to the right hands. If you were ever cropped out of the family photo, if you were ever asked not to ruin the wedding with your presence, then this story was for you. Because garbage does not write the family legacy. The ones who write it are the ones who paid for it, and paid the price in silence. Not every mother makes noise. Some build empires behind closed doors. Some write their love in deeds, not demands. And when the world finally sees them, it is not because they shouted. It is because they stood and never moved.